My name is Christina Stecker-Gossi. I'm a Healthy Food and Farms Program Coordinator here at INCAP. And I'm going to do a brief purpose and intro to this new series that we're launching called Advocates for Alternatives. And I have a few other bits and then we'll jump right into it. So this is a new series for those of you who want to join the pesticide-free movement. We will learn how to become advocates for alternatives to toxic pesticides. And if you're asking yourself why, it's because our planet and people are simply too precious to poison. So we also need to recognize that INCAP staff reside on the stolen and occupied ancestral homelands of the Chehalis, Kalapuya, Malala, Northern Paiute, Shoshanebannock, Titino, and Wasco peoples. We want to acknowledge the brutal and endless atrocities, including forest removal, experienced by Native peoples in our region, and recognize that traditional ecological knowledge and the inherent rights of nature are a guiding force to our work. So a little bit of background for anyone new to INCAP. The Northwest Center for Alternatives to Pesticides was formed in 1977. Our mission statement is INCAP works to protect community and environmental health and inspire the use of ecologically sound solutions to reduce the use of pesticides. I'm just gonna scroll through the attendee list so I can make sure I'm introducing any other staff on the call. So Andrea Stapleton is a core member of the team. Same with Ashley Cheshire. So if you're in breakouts room with either one of those, feel free to introduce yourself. And we are a regional organization. So we have staff based in Eastern and Central Oregon, Southwest Washington, and Southwest and Southeast Idaho. Our program areas include healthy food and farms, healthy water and wildlife, and healthy people and communities. And our campaign areas are safe and pesticide-free workplaces, healthy food, healthy homes and gardens, healthy schools and institutions, pesticides and the climate crisis, thriving ecosystems, pollinators, salmon and water quality, and pesticide-free food and farming. On this first call, we'll cover 3 important things: how to know what a pesticide is, how to reduce exposure to pesticides, and how to build power for change in our communities. Whether you're new to pesticides or have been an advocate for a while, everyone will have an opportunity to discuss the topic and learn how to take action. Just a reminder, all who registered will be entered into a drawing for a chance to win some fun things from our online store. So before we jump in, what is an advocate for an advocate for alternatives, an A for A? And we think it's someone who recognizes that the harms of pesticide and advocates for change to reduce pesticide use through building power in our communities. And a little quote is, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And that's from Arthur Ashe. And with that, we're going to move into a quick little survey. So you'll see some options pop up on the screen, and you can just say how you've already been an advocate for alternatives. And then we'll wait a little bit for people to respond, and then we'll look at the results together. And so after the results pop up on the screen, I'll turn it over to my colleague Shay for a little mini lesson.
Great, thank you so much, Christina. I'm really happy to be with you all today. My name is Sherilyn Peterson, and I'm the Healthy Wildlife and Water Program Manager at INCAP. And I'm going to go ahead and start us off on our little mini session on 3 steps to becoming an advocate for alternatives. So first, we're going to learn how to recognize pesticides. Then we'll learn about pesticide pathways and how to reduce exposure. And then third, we'll learn to care and build power for change in our community. Next slide, please. So learning how to recognize pesticides is the first step in becoming an advocate for alternatives. Products like these are often what comes to people's minds when they hear the word pesticide. Next slide. We're going to go ahead and do a poll. This poll is going to list a variety of substances. Go ahead and look every one of them over and decide which one of these are pesticides. So it looks like everybody had a chance to answer. So in looking at this list, as you can see, actually all of the substances on this list are pesticides or considered pesticides. And these go from the toxic, which we had DDT, we had glyphosate, and then we had least toxic alternatives, which were the Palo Santo and the peppermint. Next slide. So the EPA definition of what a pesticide is any substance meant to prevent, destroy, or repel a pest, including unwanted plants, animals, and fungi. We saw from the poll that everything listed was considered a pesticide by definition. This was even if they were considered to be least toxic. Next slide, please. Today, an average of 3 pounds of toxic pesticides are used per person each year. Exposure to these chemicals is dangerous and has negative effects on human and environmental health. Next slide. The next step in becoming an advocate for alternatives is understanding pesticide pathways and how you may become exposed. Next slide. So in order to prevent exposure, it's important to know how pesticides enter the environment. This was a resource that we created last year that outlines the 5 pesticide pathways into air, soil, and waterways. The first, which is number 1 on the diagram, is drift. Drift is when pesticides move to an unintended area as they're applied as a liquid, sorry. And then volatilization, which is number 2, is when chemicals change from a liquid to a vapor, and they also go into the air. Number 2 was, that was fumigation is number 2, I'm sorry. That's when pesticides are added to water systems directly, and this is for an ease of application. Number 3 is seed coatings and treated plants. So these are often pre-treated with systemic pesticides, and then birds and that will eat seeds will often die if they try to eat the seeds. And then number 4, runoff. This is when you have water running from like a storm event, and it's running over driveways or parking lots, and then it's being deposited into storm drains untreated. And then last is leaching. Leaching is when water seeps into the soil, picking up residue and eventually polluting groundwater. Next slide. So it's important to know how to minimize exposure in looking at labeling and signal words. To identify toxic pesticides, you want to look for one of these 2 labels containing the words caution, warning, and danger. These words will indicate the pesticide's toxicity level and also let you know that it's hazardous to human and environmental health. If you see these words, you want to remember that exposure to these products is dangerous, and it can happen in either a low dose over a long period of time or in a single high dose situation. Both can lead to a buildup of toxins in the body. It might result in serious health issues that are complicated and difficult to treat and tend to develop chronic illness over time. Next slide. So there are 5 steps if you or a loved one uses pesticides that you can follow to reduce the harms of exposure. The first being that you want to always read and understand your pesticide labels. You want to make sure that you're not over mixing, and you want to pay attention to the signal words so that you know how toxic the chemical is that you're using. Step 2, Use the required PPE or personal protective equipment. This could be anything from a mask or to a full covering of your body. Step 3, you want to follow all rules for restricted entry after an application. If you just sprayed a field or your yard, you want to make sure that you are not in there until you're able to be in there. There's an amount of time that you want to wait. Step 4, always wash your hands when you're interacting with chemicals and after application. And change the clothes that you're wearing as well, because it can pick up a lot of residue. And step 5, our final step, is to make sure that you're removing boots and everything that is contaminated from your body before entering your home, and then keeping those away from your children and your pets. So I'm going to hand this back over to Christina.
Thanks, Shay.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's always good to think about how people are exposed and how to reduce that, because it is a daily occurrence around the world. So now let's talk about the impact of staying informed and advocating for change. We all care and want to build power for change in our communities. So I'm going to share a success story with you of some policy that took place in Idaho over the last 2 years. So in the spring of 2018, there were over 24 agricultural workers who experienced pesticide spray drift from an aerial application in southwest Idaho. And the situation was difficult for many of the workers who experienced dizziness, fainting, long-term side effects, and some even chose to return back to, many of them were from Mexico, and one man in particular decided to just go back home because he didn't think it was worth it any longer. Thankfully, community was able to come together, and a Latinx-led group called Vision 2C, which is based out of Canyon County in southwest Idaho, were able to engage with the Aerial Applicators Association, who started lobbying for changes to state law to roll back protections that would help prevent and protect workers from spray drift from airplanes in the future. We were successful in preventing many of the rollbacks in the legislative session of 2019. And then over the summer of 2019, the State Department of Agriculture was petitioned to have a public rulemaking, which would be another way to change those same regulations. Through a lot of public support and many long comment letters and public testimonies, we were able to prevent the worst of the rollbacks. And we were also able to not only dig into the law and make notes on how we want to change it in the future, but we also built relationships with legislators who would like to see those laws strengthened in the future as well. And we had language defining what pesticide drift is included into the rule, which governs pesticide use in Idaho, as well as a full-on prohibition of pesticide drift, which can be used to enforce repercussions for applicators that harm workers through irresponsible drift or improper use of pesticides in the future. Many issues have also been identified through this ongoing work, including doctors not knowing how to diagnose pesticide exposure, language access to training and reporting for non-English speakers, pesticide literacy generally, and also multi-stressors like the effects of wildfire smoke and extreme heat exposure, in addition to pesticide exposure. So that's the success story. We have a lot more work to do, but it's important to celebrate when there are wins. And with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Dominica.
Excellent. Thank you, Christina and Shay. That was a wonderful introduction to some of the work that we do here at NCAP, as well as information about pesticides and the importance of caring and bringing this to our communities to reduce the amount of toxic pesticides that are affecting our communities. Introduction to some of the work that we do and some of the important reasons why we are here today to learn how to become an advocate. And this won't be the only session. We really look forward to seeing you all at future sessions where we can basically come together and learn about some of the efforts that we're all doing in our own communities and learn how we can support each other and really amplify this sort of work. And so the first thing I'm gonna say is like, why become an advocate, right? And as Christina mentioned, because the planet is too wonderful and beautiful to poison. But besides that, toxic pesticide regulation is flawed and does not address the needs of populations being exposed at higher doses and those who are more frequently exposed. And we must protect the most sensitive because like that, we are all much better protected. And so how do we advocate in our communities? Well, first thing is that we have to find our passion. And so thank you all again for being here today. Advocating against the use of toxic pesticides is certainly a passion for me. And I'm so glad to see you all here today because that means that you all care about this topic as well. And, we truly believe in the fact that, toxic pesticides are harmful and that we can come together to make a difference. So the next piece is like stay informed, right? So we're all here today to learn a little bit more, learn from each other, and that's definitely a step to helping to become an advocate for alternatives. And next piece is like finding your advocacy style. COVID has definitely changed the way things work. We're all here today remotely via Zoom, which is a great platform. But maybe your style is being more in the community, and that's okay. So finding the style that you like to really be able to advocate for alternatives. And the next piece is to get involved and meet others and network. And so again, we're here today doing that with each other. We'll have a chance to break out into smaller groups so that we can talk to one another and get to know one another a little bit better and talk about our concerns and what brought us here today. And the last piece is to use your voice. We're all here. Again, we would love to hear from you all after the session. We're going to be sending out some great resources. Continue to stay engaged with us. We will continue to, again, have these types of events, and we love to see you back. So some examples of ways to advocate that we will be sending out in a follow-up email is the first one is to sign our pesticide-free pledge. And that really confirms that you are committed to reducing your use or maybe even totally eliminating your use of toxic pesticides. And as we saw from the poll, there's a lot of different options. We don't have to just go for the most toxic pesticides, but we don't also have to live with pest issues. There are other ways to really address pest problems, weed problems, fungal issues, and so on and so forth. So really staying informed. And that first step is signing the pesticide-free pledge. That'll also, ensure that we have your email address and we can keep you informed on future advocates for alternative events. Another way that you can advocate is in your home, right? The decisions that you make in your home to address, again, pest and weed issues, making those choices, doing the research, or looking on our website to see what types of resources that we have for alternative solutions to these pest issues. Another way is you can ask your nursery, right, to supply plants that don't come pre-treated with pesticides. Toxic pesticides like neonicotinoids, which are harmful to bees. And so we could potentially be going to nurseries, purchasing plants that we hope to bring back to our garden, but it turns out that they are actually pre-treated with pesticides and are harmful. And so there's ways that we can advocate for nurseries to not be carrying these types of plants anymore to ensure that we're creating healthy habitats in our home. And again, we'll send out more information on how to do that. Again, researching pesticides, researching what our cities are doing, what our children's schools are applying on the grounds, in city parks, just all over. Sometimes we live in multifamily housing, homeowners associations. There's lots of different rules and policies out there. And a lot of the times toxic pesticides are kind of the go-to, but we've seen, through our advocacy work in the past, that sometimes it just takes someone to speak up to really just make a drastic change, right? By saying, hey, you know what, this maybe is not the best solution. Let's try something else. Let's get a couple neighbors on board, and really, you are able to change some of the practices that are going on in our community. So there are many ways that we can advocate for alternatives. And again, just really happy to see you all here joining us today. And I will go ahead and pass it back.
Thank you for that. We definitely are a resource for you, whatever your advocacy style is and however you are engaging or hope to engage in the future. So I'm going to introduce the next section, which is breakout rooms. We're going to have 10 minutes together in breakout rooms of around 5 people. So just a reminder, if you want to be in a Spanish language breakout room, to write ES after your name the same way that you edited it by clicking the 3 dots. So let us know in the chat if you don't want to be in a breakout room. You can just put it in there now, and Laura will note that. Once you get into breakout rooms, if we have a fun little technological gadgety thing that I'll put in the chat now, so everyone can open it in a separate window. And it's basically just like a whiteboard that all of us can interact with. And you can write notes, either one person from each group, or you can all access that at the same time. And the question prompts are, what does a future without pesticides look like to you? What brought you here today? What actions do you plan to take? And what do you need from future calls to grow your advocacy work? You don't need to worry about answering all of them. And definitely don't forget to introduce yourselves to the other people in your group before you dive into conversation. And I'll also mention that Ben and Mary Elena are both involved with the ongoing campaign in Idaho. So if they're in your groups, feel free to ask them about that work as well. Since I already gave an Idaho example, I feel like the first thing that comes to mind is that the city of Boise in Southwest Idaho is conducting a pesticide use reduction pilot program, which I think is very cool, and we could help you replicate in your city if that sounds like something you'd like. They have pesticide-free parks, reduced toxicity plans, and overall use reduction. And there's a lot of buy-in, so we can help build that buy-in where you are as well. So we're going to do a little bit of debrief. If anyone wants to share about something that struck them during conversations in the small groups. Yeah, and I can go first. It was Athena, I believe, was mentioning how she lives in Florida and there's a lot of invasive plants there that they have to manage. And oftentimes herbicides are resorted to because it's just such an overwhelming experience to have to whole landscapes of plants. And it struck me that came up in this call because a lot of people are thinking about that and like how large landscapes are attended in a way that doesn't resort to things that have effects to species that are not the target audience for the target for the certain pesticides. So more to come on that. And does anyone else feel like they heard something they want to share? Something that was new or inspiring or fun connection?
This is Ashley. I can jump in. In our group, one of the topics that came up was just loved ones that have been exposed to pesticides and suffered from illness. And so, when we're thinking about a world without pesticides, we're, remembering the health effects that have impacted people we love. And for me and my grandma, that we can't definitively link her cancer to the pesticide exposure, but she played behind the tractors that were spraying pesticides as a kid on a farm. So things like that are things we want to prevent from happening in the future. And that's why we're interested in advocating for alternatives.
Definitely. Just yesterday, I was out on a trial plot for cover crops, and there was a fogger going through the next door apple grove. And I was way outside of the 125-foot buffer that's legally required and is the strongest federal protection for anyone spraying around agricultural spraying. And when the wind shifted, I smelt it, It's tricky. It's, we don't have kids playing behind DDT sprayers anymore, but there's still a lot to be done. Anyone else?
I just had a few folks, they were talking about what they would like to see in future calls. And one was they would like advice on how to connect with municipalities, which we talked a little bit about, the process of that. And then the other was kind of talking more directly about pesticides that are being used, sort of in like a flowchart manner, which we love flowcharts at NCAP. So I think that we could probably do something like that. We do have a history coming up on our second one, which Christina will talk about at the end. But yeah, we didn't think about that. So that would be a great thing to talk about, like atrazine, glyphosate, some of the more heavy hitter pesticides that are toxic. And then just looking at what a future without pesticides would look like. And somebody said connecting pesticide use to climate change, which is something that we're trying to do currently. So I'm glad that you brought that up. We will be putting out our newsletter on that exact topic in about a month. So but yeah, that's all I have. Let somebody else share.
Cool. We'll take one more if anyone wants to share, and then we'll close out for the night. Russell, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wonder, have you explored any ties to the Real Organic Project? Or
Definitely.
Regenerative Organic Certification?
Yeah, we had a session at our organic farming conference that we've been hosting for the last decade in Idaho, all about the differences between the Real Organic Project and the National Organic Program standards. And that was just for an Idaho audience. But we're definitely on board and would love to get the word out there.
Cool. They had I don't know if they're going to do it again next year, but they had a symposium in January where they brought all kinds of leaders from the organic movement together. It was really quite inspiring.
If anyone wants to learn more about that, you should join the mailing. Well, we might have announcements, but the mailing list for, it's not Rodale, it's the other one. Real Organic Project will get you in the right place for that.
Yeah,
if you want to connect with what Russ is talking about. Yeah. Well, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Feel free to put anything else in the chat while I'm closing this out. So this is obviously our first call. We're really excited to have had you all come tonight to be here with us as we launch this new way of connecting with our supporters, finding new ways to help and grow our work on the ground where you live. So just a couple of topics that, in addition to what Shay was saying, we might dig into. One being the history of pesticides, to be really grounded in why we want to build a different future and promote and expand the use of alternatives through policy, increased funding, local support, better understanding about the true impacts of toxic pesticides. And a lot of, just a quick teaser on the history, a lot of it has ties to weapons that were used during wartime that were adapted after the battles were done and the wars were over to new applications back at home. Also, we can explore culture of control. Pesticides like tear gas, which are registered by the federal government as pesticides, are used to control people. So we can explore the idea that people are not pests. And lastly, but not lastly, because we can explore a lot, is that really digging into needed policy changes and also the history of pesticide policy in the US and how it's led to the overuse of toxic pesticides, and even to the local and state level. There's a concept called preemption that prevents like local municipalities or townships from making their own laws. If they wanted to say ban atrazine, or back in the day, ban DDT, they would not have been able to because there are powers that would prevent it. It would be struck down in a court of law. So those are just some ideas that we wanted to let you know that we're thinking about, but feel free to send us other suggestions. And also if you have particular work going on the ground that you'd like our help with, feel free to connect with any of us. You can find all of our staff information on our website, reach out to us via email or phone call. And again, just thank you for coming tonight. It's really exciting to see so many faces and to connect with new people. And we hope to see you next time.
And I'm not sure if Christina, you said this, but next time will be in about 3 months. This is a series, so we don't have the date set yet, but you will be getting an email coming up with the date for the next call in the series in about 3 months, and we'll continue from there.